In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the Dickey Bell Trail located inside of the Uwharrie National Forest. This trail is rated moderately difficult and around 3 miles long. As the only Jeep Badge of Honor trail in North Carolina, it has remained one of the forest's most well-traveled. Part of this heavy use is why it saw some significant changes this year and why I wanted to make this video showcasing just how different it is. Though it's not a directional trail, I will be showing you the most commonly traveled direction, which starts near the Green Gap Shores and Dutch John Road intersection. What I'm showing you is technically where the trail starts, but a lot of people bypass this section because it's easy to overlook. If you end up taking a left onto the Green Gap Shores Drive, you will miss this section. If you go a little bit further up, you'll hook a left into this and you can kind of see the bridge through the woods. This bridge sends you over the Dutch John Creek. Now, if you've been going to Uwharrie as long as I have, you actually remember when this used to be a creek crossing that you would actually drive through. This section isn't overly difficult, but if it's your first time doing the Dickey Bell Trail, I highly recommend it. Now, this first section of trail is fairly easy to navigate. While it is a bit steep, it's not going to be overly difficult unless you got a steady rainfall. What you have to watch out for here is breakover more than anything else. So if you have a longer wheelbase Gladiator that's not lifted very much, you might rub your belly. Most Wranglers and Broncos aren't going to have an issue here. From here, you're going to make your way up the climb until you get to the first, let's just call it challenge or obstacle, and that is this boulder that's essentially sitting in the middle of the trail. Now, you can go to the left, which is perfectly fine, or you can take the way I'm showing you now, which is where you flex around. If you have a longer wheelbase vehicle, I recommend staying to what we'll call the passenger side as you're driving up the hill, and go ahead and letting your Jeep flex out on the rock. You should not hit your rocker. I wouldn't sweat that. It's just navigating around it on the outside can be a little challenging. Now, from here, it's fairly mellow until you get to one of the biggest changes, which is now a new bypass section. Since this part is new, I'm going to go ahead and show you this, and then I'll circle back to the tougher section. Essentially, the bypass is going to be to your right as you're driving up the mountain, and that is going to be where you're going to want to go if you're new to off-roading or riding an ATV or motorcycle. There's nothing hard on this section, but it is very scenic, and I think it's a pretty welcome addition. Now, a little fun fact, though the highest point in Uwharrie National Forest is just over 1,100 feet, the mountain range here is thought to be the oldest in North America. At a little over 51,000 acres, the Uwharrie National Forest isn't the biggest OHV area on the East Coast, but it is home to some of the best trails in the state of North Carolina. My only complaint about the forest system is that it does close annually from December 15th to April 1st. This bypass is only going to take a few minutes, and it dumps you back out onto the trail where you can either take a right, which will continue onto the trail, or you can take a left and actually go back down the harder section of trail that I'll show you now. Now, this harder section of trail is kind of what gave the Dickey Bell its sort of more difficult rating. And the first section isn't that bad. It's mostly just loose rocks and a gradual climb. You have multiple line choices. Probably the most common is to go to your driver's side, so the far left, as you make your way up. Now, if you're coming up from the left, it's going to split out again where you have multiple line choices. The most well-traveled and what I would recommend is going to the trail that's closest to the guardrail. And from here, you're going to have 3 line choices. Far left, what I call middle left around the tree, and far right. All have their own level of difficulty and can humble even a well-built rig if you're off the line. Now, if you want to see more about this section and line choices, I will put a link on the screen to my recent Uwharrie trip showing all 3 being used. And as you see it now, what I typically believe is the more common line for people, especially if this is their first time on the trail, this is going to twist up your suspension really well, give you an opportunity to use front and rear lockers if you have them. It's not so extreme that you really got to worry about body damage, but it will twist up the vehicle, and if you have something longer wheelbase, you for sure can hit the back bumper, and occasionally in my Gladiator I will hit the slider. Now, as you see, this section of the trail isn't that extreme in general wheeling standards, but it has proven troublesome and dangerous for novice off-roaders and dirt bikers and ATVs. So I think the bypass is a good option if you're simply not up for the challenge, or you're a little worried about this section and maybe you're by yourself. There are some trees that if you needed to hook to, that you could winch to. Just don't forget to make sure that you have a tree saver, and make sure just to kind of wheel within your abilities, because again, not that hard, but it wouldn't take much to, break a tie rod or an axle shaft here if you start bouncing or get a little too spirited with your throttle. Now, at this point, if you've gone this way, you've officially either conquered or bypassed the most difficult section of the Dickey Bell Trail. That's not to say that the rest of the trail doesn't have a few challenging spots, but there's nothing nearly as technical as this portion. The next area for you to potentially engage a locker is this rocky climb. Moving out to the right will give you a little bit more of a challenge, but that's not much after this. There is a little rock outcropping at the very top of this hill climb that you either need to go to the left or right of. I'd recommend just putting your driver's side tire on top of the rock. That'll keep you far enough away from the fence that you won't have an issue, but you won't tear up your wheel or drag your diff. If it's raining, I will say that clay going down some of these climbs can be very slick, but you're not in that big of a sort of a worry about body damage and things like that. You've got enough to sort of kind of keep you in place, and the way the walls of some of these trails are, and at least especially some of the downhills, it's usually not an issue, but you have to be careful for sure. This place can be very difficult when it's wet. This is probably a good time to mention vehicle setup for this trail. Given it is a Jeep Badge of Honor trail, you should be able to navigate it in a stock Jeep Wrangler Rubicon without issue. While you don't need 37s or 40s to conquer this trail by any means, I would recommend a rear locker and a mud terrain if you want to try all of the obstacles. If it's dry, a good all-terrain will absolutely be adequate for traction, but rainfall can easily pack up an all-terrain here, leaving you quite literally spinning in place. The other issue you have to think about is one of the most common failures I see isn't from people having trouble with the clay here, it's actually the rocks, and specifically some of these rocks in the park are really sharp and they will slice through your sidewall quicker than you would ever believe. I have seen so many people with flats in Uwharrie, it blows my mind. I have even sliced the top cap of my tires before, just with the tire spinning and me trying to get up harder sections of trail. I tend to run Nitto trail grapplers for most of my rigs for this type of wheeling. I've never experienced a failure out of one of those. I've definitely taken some chunks out of some lugs from just getting on the gas and trying to make it up stuff when it's wet, but just something to be aware of. This place is pretty hard on tires, even though it's not that difficult of a park overall. Most of the trail is fairly mellow from this point. I do like to kind of get down on it a little bit with my Jeep, especially if I'm driving the 392. So if it seems like I'm driving a little quick, well, I just enjoy this section of trail to do that on. Now, once you get sort of past this regular kind of mellow hilly section, you're going to get to a decision where you can either go to the left, which will exit the trail back onto Dutch John Road, or you're going to go to the right, which is the new section of the trail. Much like the new bypass at the start of the trail, this section is very scenic and wide enough for passing in a few spots. There's no real challenge, and you can navigate this section fairly quickly depending on how fast you want to drive. I'm not sure what the exact reasoning is why they killed one section of the trail to open this up. I do miss some of the sort of go fast sections on the other side, but this seems to be perfectly fine in terms of overall scenicness, this is probably better. In terms of challenge, the other section was probably a little bit better. I'm sure someone can chime in the comments on why they did this exactly. Again, no real challenge on this section, but it's very scenic, and the big benefit is that it actually dumps you out on the back side of the Daniel Trail. So if you want to continue your wheeling day, you can go up to the big overlook that everybody likes, or you can get back onto Dutch John Road and, you know, go continue exploring the park in other places. If you guys have any questions, just drop them in the comments. If you want to see some stuff I'm working on behind the scenes, you can always check me out on all social media at Mansour Editor. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope to see you on the trail.